In the shadow of minarets that pierced the heavens, one man sat upon a throne built from the bones of empires. They called him Magnificent. They called him Lawgiver. But behind the silken veils of his court, they whispered another name, the destroyer of his own blood. Suleiman I did not merely rule the Ottoman Empire. He became it. And in becoming it, he lost everything a man holds sacred. This is the story of how absolute power transforms love into paranoia, sons into threats, and a lawgiver into an executioner of his own legacy. When Suleiman ascended the throne in 1520, he inherited an empire already gorged on conquest. His father, Selim the Grim, had painted 3 continents red. But young Suleiman possessed something his father never did, the patience of a serpent coiled in tall grass. The European courts watched nervously as this 26-year-old sultan consolidated power with terrifying efficiency. Within months, he had purged his father's advisors, not through blood, but through calculated exile. He understood a truth that would define his reign. Fear maintains power, but law legitimizes it. He rebuilt the legal codes from foundation to pinnacle. While Christian Europe burned heretics and drowned witches, Suleiman's Qanunnameh brought structure to chaos. Citizens could predict their fates. Merchants knew their taxes. Soldiers understood their spoils. But law is a hungry thing. It feeds on enforcement, and enforcement requires examples. The executions began early, not of innocents, but of those who challenged the architecture of his new order. Provincial governors who pocketed tax gold, judges who sold verdicts to the highest bidder, janissaries who thought themselves above the law they were sworn to protect. Suleiman's message was elegant in its brutality. Under my law, you will prosper. Against my one, you will cease to exist. By his 10th year of reign, Suleiman had crushed Belgrade, conquered Rhodes, and stood at the gates of Vienna itself. His armies were an extension of his will, instruments that carved his law into foreign soil with scimitar and cannon fire. But here emerges the paradox that would haunt him. To be feared abroad, he must be loved at home. To be loved at home, he must appear merciful. To appear merciful, he must occasionally show weakness. And weakness invites the knife. Europe called him the terror of Christendom. His own people called him Kanuni, the lawgiver. But in the perfumed chambers of the harem, where silk whispered against marble and ambition bred in scented darkness, another power was rising. Her name was Hürrem. The Russians called her Roxolana. History would remember her as the woman who broke the one law even Suleiman could not rewrite, the law of his own heart. Hürrem Sultan was not born to power. Captured, enslaved, brought to the harem as property, she possessed the only weapon available to the powerless, the ability to make the powerful need her. Where other concubines offered beauty, she offered wit. Where they offered submission, she offered challenge. Where they offered pleasure, she offered something far more dangerous. She offered Suleiman a version of himself he wanted to believe existed. Not the lawgiver, not the conqueror, the man. And Suleiman, master of empires, fell like a stone into dark water. He broke every tradition, made her his legal wife, freed her from slavery, gave her apartments in the palace proper, violating centuries of protocol. The harem had always been a mechanism of control, dozens of women ensuring no single mother accumulated power. But Suleiman handed Hürrem the keys to the cage and invited her to rule beside him. The court watched in horror as the law itself bent around one woman's influence. When campaigning in Persia, Suleiman wrote to her, "My springtime, my joy, my life, I exist only in your presence." The man who held absolute power over millions begged for letters from one woman. But love in a palace is never simple. Love is alliance. Love is succession. Love is the elimination of rivals. Hürrem had given Suleiman sons, but so had others. In an Ottoman tradition, the throne was decided not by birth order, but by competence and survival. Every prince was a potential sultan. Every sultan in waiting was a threat. Mustafa was Suleiman's eldest son, born of another woman before Hürrem's ascension. Brilliant, charismatic, beloved by the janissaries, he was everything an Ottoman prince should be, which made him everything Hürrem could not allow. The whisper campaign began slowly. Mustafa is too popular with the army. Mustafa speaks of reforms. Mustafa accepts visitors from governors without your knowledge. Each fact was true. Each implication was poison. Suleiman watched his son through new eyes. When had Mustafa become so confident? Why did the soldiers love him so deeply? How long before popularity became ambition? How long before ambition became treason? In 1553, Suleiman summoned Mustafa to his military tent during the Persian campaign. The prince came without hesitation, trusting in the bond between father and son. He entered the tent alone. 7 deaf mutes waited inside with silken cords. Executioners who could hear no pleading, speak no testimony. The Chronicles record that Mustafa fought, that he called out for his father, that Suleiman stood behind a screen, watching through fabric as his firstborn was strangled. When it was finished, Suleiman emerged, ordered the execution of Mustafa's young son, eliminating any future claim. Then he returned to his chambers and governed as if nothing had occurred. But those close to him noticed something had shifted. The lawgiver who had brought order to an empire could no longer bring order to his own mind. After Mustafa's execution, Suleiman ruled for another 13 years. On paper, they were successful years, more conquests, more laws, more constructions, but something essential had broken. He executed his Grand Vizier, Ibrahim Pasha, the man who had been his closest friend for 30 years, on suspicion of disloyalty. The suspicions were almost certainly false. It didn't matter. The architecture of power required constant pruning. Hürrem died in 1558, leaving Suleiman truly alone for the first time in decades. The woman who had reshaped his world simply ceased to exist, and no law he could write would reverse it. Power, he learned too late, has no jurisdiction over death. His remaining years were marked by campaigns he no longer needed to fight and buildings he no longer cared to see completed. The man who had once believed the law could perfect an empire now understood. Law governs behavior, but it cannot govern the heart, cannot prevent paranoia, cannot resurrect murdered sons, cannot summon dead wives from the earth. In 1566, at 71 years old, Suleiman died during yet another military campaign. His Grand Vizier concealed the death for weeks, fearing the army would mutiny before succession was secured. Even in death, Suleiman was a piece to be moved on the board of power. They embalmed his body in honey and pretended he still lived, issuing orders from a tent that contained only a corpse. The greatest lawgiver in Ottoman history spent his final weeks as a puppet, his death itself subjected to political theater. Suleiman's empire stretched from the gates of Vienna to the shores of Yemen, from the steppes of Crimea to the sands of Algeria. He built mosques that still inspire awe, wrote laws that governed millions, expanded his domain beyond anything his ancestors imagined. But he died having executed his most capable son, murdered his closest friend, and lived long enough to bury the only woman who saw him as more than a sultan. This is the cost of absolute power. Not the enemies defeated or the provinces conquered. The cost is measured in what you destroy of yourself. Every execution is a piece of your humanity filed away. Every paranoid decision is a wall built between who you were and who you must become. Suleiman the Magnificent created an empire that would endure centuries beyond his death. But the man who entered the throne room in 1520, young, idealistic, believing law could perfect the world, that man died long before his body failed in a tent on the Hungarian plains. The historians call him magnificent, the lawgiver, the conqueror. But perhaps the real question is this: can any man possess absolute power without it possessing him in return? Can law govern an empire without devouring the lawgiver? Can you build a legacy without sacrificing everything that makes you human? Suleiman believed he could. History suggests otherwise. What do you think? Can power ever be held without corruption? Or does the throne inevitably consume whoever sits upon it? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to descend deeper into the dark corridors of history, subscribe to Dark Ages Chronicles. Because every crown has blood in its foundations, and every empire casts long shadows.